Support for Carolina Business Review made possible by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries, headquartered in Hartsville since 1899. And by Business North Carolina Magazine. There's a place for those who subscribe to the theory that business doesn't have to be boring.
Well, jazz diva and soul singer Sade once wrote lines in a song, "When every day is Christmas and every night is like New Year's Eve." Well, we are far from those days right now. Real estate value is still trying to find a bottom, and now federal legislators are playing chicken with the U.S. debt limit deadline. It seems we lurch from feeling pretty good about our economy to a stark drop in overall confidence. Well, regardless, happy summer, and welcome again to Carolina Business Review, the most widely watched source for Carolina business and public policy. Later on this edition, he is at the center of the budget storm in the Tar Heel State and is responsible for North Carolina's largest state agency, Health and Human Services Director Lanier Cansler.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. And by Novant Health, a not-for-profit group of hospitals and physician clinics, ranked as one of our nation's 10 best healthcare systems, caring for patients and communities in North and South Carolina. Major funding also by King & Spalding, an international law firm with over 800 lawyers in 13 offices worldwide, providing legal services to clients in the Carolinas and throughout the world. For more information, visit www.kslaw.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded June 24, 2011. On this week's program, Emma Littlejohn of the Littlejohn Group, Jay Bryson of Wells Fargo Securities, and special guest Lanier Cansler, Secretary, North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Now, Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program. Happy summer, guys. It's officially summer. You feeling better about things now that it's summer, Jay?
Feeling hotter, for sure.
No pun intended. This would seem pretty predictable, but we do get, you talk about hotter, we do get these fits and starts about how we feel about how our business is going, not just the national economy, but here in the Carolinas. We feel like pretty good, and then something will come out about gas prices, or the Fed will say something, or we'll see that, wait a minute, real estate really hasn't bottomed yet. Where are we really?
Well, keep in mind that all expansions kind of, go through these fits and starts. And that's nothing different here. I mean, I guess what is different is, recently we've been hit by a number of shocks. We had the gasoline prices, we had Japan, we had any sorts of rumblings with Greece going on, and you overlay that with an economy that is still kind of sluggish and hungover from the housing downturn, and then you're going to have these bouts of confidence coming and confidence, waning out again. So, but in general, the numbers, GDP numbers for the first quarter that were revised are 1.9% GDP growth. We're thinking we're probably looking at the same sort of thing in the second quarter as well. So it's an expansion. It's just an expansion. It's not real strong.
Is this the new baseline? Is this how we're going to be? Is this the new economy now? We can't.
No. When people say the new normal, that implies that 5 years from now we're still going to be having a 1.9% GDP growth rate. I don't think it's going to be like that. But the history would show whenever you go through a major asset price bubble, particularly when it relates to housing, the expansion that follows that, at least in the first few years, tends to be really slow. And so that's where we are right now. And 3-5 years from now, I think it will be different. I don't think it's going to be like we are now, but we've got a while to go yet, I think.
Emma, it does seem that it's pretty amazing that, it's a little dramatic, but almost every time that we turn around, we seem to be looking for a bottom in real estate prices, and specifically residential real estate. Do you get that sense, being the inside baseball of real estate? And, you look at commercial, but you also look at residential. We're still looking for a bottom, aren't we?
Absolutely. It's very rocky out there. Every asset class is seeing infusion of capital, but it's just so hard to acquire the real estate.
And what are the core asset classes in real estate, as you see them?
Commercial, industrial, multifamily,
okay,
and the for sale market. And there's still a tremendous amount of capital that wants to be in the Carolinas, that wants to deploy, but getting access to the assets is challenging. The exit strategies are hard to predict. So, and from an appraisal value standpoint, there's no confidence in that process, and there are very few transactions, so it takes longer to actually get anything acquired. So it's just, again, a matrix of issues that are not letting things normalize as quickly to values that are more stabilized. Okay. Not necessarily a bottom, because it's just going to be bumpy.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when you say getting access to the assets, do you mean that there are willing buyers, but there aren't willing sellers?
There are so much of the properties that are tied up with litigation in the banking world, getting to them because there's so much to process. And so getting to the right people, getting the capital sources in front of the people, and actually being able to go through the process of acquiring. We're seeing some things move very quickly once it hits the priority sheet, but there's just so much to be dealt with still.
Jay, are the residential sellers finally understanding that they aren't going to get what they had hoped to get for their house? I mean, there's some reality now.
I think in general there is some reality, but you still have a very, very large foreclosure pipeline still coming at us, and that will, as those foreclosures continue to come, that's going to keep some downward pressure on prices, throughout the country.
Let's go back to you just for a second here, Emma, and talk a little bit about, are there developments, and I throw this one out, we were talking right before the program, Columbia, the Bull Street project, developer Bob Hughes from upstate South Carolina has made a bid and has been approved to buy that project and develop it. That is a marquee project in a capital city like Columbia. What are some projects that are encouraging out there?
Well, quite frankly, if you're talking about a large mixed-use redevelopment project,
a
lot. We're not saying anything except the few places where there is already a need and there's some funding from public sources, we will see some things move forward. In some markets, there's a hotel demand based upon the tourist economy and conventions, centers, and other things. But there really is no vertical development on mixed use. I think people want to see it coming. I think municipalities are preparing for those to come. However, right now, besides multifamily, which is getting lending, and there is interest in that from a variety of different investors, we'll see some of that as the kind of catalyst to some of these types of developments.
And let me just switch pretty quickly to you, Jay, and talk a little bit about the debt limit that's being debated, at least the federal debt limit right now. How concerned are you that they are, fast and loose isn't the right way to say it, but maybe lawmakers aren't being as responsible as they should be about nailing down a decision, not just on the debt limit, but making some of the tough choices, and let's get past this. Are you concerned that this is going to keep the markets in a state of flux? Yeah,
I'm a little bit concerned. I mean, I think at the end of the day, they will pass the debt limit. There's going to be a price to be paid in terms of some sort of deficit reduction. I think that's going to happen. But the longer this process goes on, the closer we get to early August, when the Treasury bumps up against its authority. I think markets become more and more nervous, even though it may be a small probability event. If we in fact do default, the cost of that would be huge. And even though it's a small probability, if you're pricing those probabilities, you've got to be a little bit nervous.
Is there fair to say that we have a lot of anxiety pent up now? Any additional will have a magnifying effect? We've already come through this period where what's going on, we don't know who's in charge, who needs to be doing what, and the fact that we're playing a little bit fast and loose here.
Well, I don't know if markets are really, how much markets are really priced for it right now. I mean, you look at the yield on the 10-year government bond, it's below 3% right now. I mean, if you really thought that there was going to be some sort of default, I would think it's going to be a lot higher. So my fear is, if we get closer to that August 2nd drop dead sort of date and nothing's happened at that point, you could see a pretty severe market reaction.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, guys. We're going to bring our guest on in just a moment. Coming up over the next couple weeks, you can see programs like, should be an interesting and very compelling dialogue with the CEOs of some of the major urban areas. Coming up on the program, it'll be a panel of mayors, and they include Anthony Fox from Charlotte, From Winston-Salem, Alan joins, and from Columbia will be Stephen Benjamin. We will be talking about not just the issues that municipalities face, but how you lead in a time of real debate. And that's coming up in a few weeks. You know, if you look at the website of the North Carolina State Agency, Health and Human Services, you see many things, of course. But under the heading of Bio for Senior Staff, you would read that the CEO is responsible for, and I quote, ensuring the health, safety, and well-being of all North Carolinians in almost every phase of life. Add into that it's the largest state agency and most directly involved with Medicaid and administering health care programs, and you've got a job that is not just broad, but it's deep, too. Joining us now is North Carolina Secretary for Health and Human Services, the Honorable Lanier Cansler. Your Honor, welcome, and good to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Gosh, where do we start? Mr. Secretary, let's talk about Medicaid. It's a program that is certainly being debated nationally. Where is it now, and how does the debate nationally, how do you scenario plan for what it's going to look like in North Carolina 6 months, a year, 10 years from now?
Well, we're obviously tracking what the federal government's doing and the discussion that's going on about block grants. You know, Medicaid is a state federal program. The federal government puts in about 2/3 of the money, and the state puts in about 1/3. We have a responsibility for managing it, but we also have to get their approval for any major decision we make concerning the program. The state faces a real challenge with Medicaid because of sustaining the growing costs. You know, you cover people of different levels of income, but with health care reform, we're going to see a major growth in the number of people enrolled in the program. On any given day right now, there's about 1.5 million North Carolinians in our Medicaid program. And after health care reform, it's probably going to be somewhere between 2 and 2.2 million North Carolinians in the health care program. And that cost, along with the aging of the population and the growth of our population going towards the 7th most populous state, is a real challenge. Our concern about the federal government and block grants, as many states would be concerned, is it basically says, here's a block of money, you manage the program. And they've indicated so far that they would give some adjustment for inflation, some adjustment for population growth. But as I've talked to our U.S. senators and others, I've said, if you leave out the aging factor, then you put us in a real fiscal mess because of the fact that the aging of the population is what creates a more expensive population for health care. And North Carolina is aging. The data I've seen 20 years from now, we'll have twice as many people over the age of 65 as we do now. We'll have 75 counties that have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 20. And we'll have 50% more people over the age of 85.
So, Mr. Secretary, when you're driving down the road and you're thinking about these things and these challenges, how do you come up with an answer that says, not only is Medicaid almost the last stop for a lot of folks, but what happens to them if we don't have the money, if you can't give them the services, if you don't have the asset to deploy? What's the safety net for those additional million or so Carolinians that can't find their way?
Well, the focus we have right now is trying to make sure that make every dollar count, that we're not wasting Medicaid dollars.
Is there still that much efficiency that you can run out the system?
We think there is still a good bit for a number of reasons, and I meet every day with heads of the hospitals and heads of the medical society and others talking about how do we make the system more efficient and effective. But, you know, there's 4 ways to control Medicaid costs. One is to limit the number of people in it, and the federal government basically at this point in time says you can't control that anymore. 2 is to eliminate services, and that's a very difficult thing to do because you can eliminate a service like, say, podiatry, but then the diabetics who need foot assistance and foot care, if they don't get it there, either they're going to have more serious problems, which would be more expensive, or they'll go to some other care provider that may be more expensive, and so you have to be careful in dealing with services. Third way is to pay the providers less, and we're doing that. We're reducing providers in half the last several years, but other than hospitals, providers don't have to serve Medicaid, and so when physicians start falling out of the system and they can't get access, then the Medicaid people go to the emergency departments, which is a lot more expensive. And then the fourth way is the way we manage care. And in North Carolina, we've used the Community Care Network, which is a network of 95% of all the primary care physicians in the state, working with public health, working with hospitals, working with the specialty physicians, in trying to make sure that the way we manage care is going to reduce costs. And that's also going to lead to the health information exchange and the ability to more readily exchange health information between providers to avoid duplication and improper care.
Jay?
Mr. Secretary, if I read between the lines correctly with what you just said, it doesn't sound like you would be in favor of a block grant program from the federal government because of the aging, factor that you'd lined out. Is there any benefits to a block grant program that you can, really work with?
I'm not saying we wouldn't be in favor of some kind of block grant arrangement. It's just that it's got to have all the factors involved. The thing that the federal government is offering with the block grant discussion is greater flexibility in how we manage, greater flexibility with eligibles, greater flexibility with the services we provide, where we don't have to get federal approval on every decision we make. And that could be a good thing, because one of the most frustrating things is when you know a way that you can become more efficient, but you have to work through months of negotiations with the federal government to try to get the approval to do that. That flexibility could give us greater ability to manage, but the problem is the states, there are a couple states under special waivers right now that do this, but they're Rhode Island and other states that are small, not growing very rapidly, not having the same thing. And here we are, one of the fastest growing states in the nation, and we're very concerned that unless you have all the factors involved, all the flexibility in the world is just going to put us in a position that every year we're going to be trying to figure out, well, what do we cut next to stay within the block grant?
In terms of in-migration, we see a significant percentage of that as older retirees, whether they're halfbacks or moving in, or trailing families. What kind of numbers are you seeing, and are people going to start thinking about the Carolinas as not a great place to be if our health care is impeded? Well,
interesting enough, at this point in time, we're still probably one of the more liberal states with respect to Medicaid benefits. We cover seniors up to 100% of the federal poverty level. I think South Carolina covers them to 85% of the poverty level. And we know there is folks between that gap from South Carolina that ends up in North Carolina.
Right.
But Medicaid, again, is a federal program. So because they move into North Carolina and seek services, we can't deny it because they came from South Carolina. And so we're looking at how we can do some of these things differently. And there's been discussion in the legislature, well, why don't we go back to the 85%? Because 15 years ago, that's where we were. But again, the federal government says we can't reduce the eligibility levels now. And so even if the legislature decided they want to, right now we're restricted by the federal government with the ability to do that. So we know we have folks that may be from South Carolina that comes into Charlotte to get health care and then gets admitted to a nursing home in North Carolina because they're between that gap, and North Carolina will pay the cost where South Carolina may not.
So that reputation that North Carolina has about being a little bit more generous when it comes to Medicaid, you cited that one measure, but is there some wiggle room for you to figure out how can we not be as generous but still be able to cover enough people?
Well, that's a part of our discussion, and traditionally, up until this budget, the legislature basically controlled what kind of services we offered. They kind of outlined how we determined the reimbursement, and they outlined what the eligibility was for the program. In this particular budget, they've said, here's the budget, here's what we want you to do. You got to live within budget, and if you can't, then we want you to cut rates or cut services or whatever. And so I'm looking right now at what we can do, because it's going to be a tough budget to achieve, and how we might be able to modify services. And in the legislation, some of the things that's been done is like with adult dental, and there's different rules for children versus adult. With adult dental, we'll only provide services when there is a problem. It will not be the normal get your checkup and do those kind of things. There'll actually have to be a problem. Same kind of thing happens with optical. And so the concern is we're moving because you don't have to deal with preventive, but we're trying to keep the services in place for the crisis, but we'll probably have more crisis services because we're not doing the preventive. And that's the balance of all of this.
I realize this is a different program, but if you were in Washington, what sort of things would you be looking at in terms of Medicare reform? What really makes sense there?
Well, if I could answer the question, I would be a very wealthy man, because that's the challenge, and it's the challenge at the state and the federal level. We are, with the community care network of our primary care, the Department of Health and Human Services in North Carolina, are working closely with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, looking at how we may do some pilots with respect to our form of medical home with the CCNC network. If you start managing Medicare the way we're managing Medicaid, then you also increase the ability to build a stronger infrastructure of technology and everything to do what we need to do. And I think one of the things we've got to do, and I've been trying to do this in the department itself, is instead of having all these silos of services, is really try to serve the whole person in a more unified form, and that way you avoid duplication of efforts. And I think that's what we've got to do with Medicaid and Medicare. And then in North Carolina, you know, we're going to have almost a fourth of the state in Medicaid. Then you add 700,000 or 800,000 people that's in the state employees health plan. You add another 100 and some thousand children who's in CHIPS. We're approaching a third of the state will be covered by some kind of insurance that's sponsored by state government by 2014. We've got to start looking at how we do all those things as a whole and manage them more on a collaborative basis rather than everything being done separately and duplicating efforts and sometimes duplicating costs.
Yeah, and let me follow up quickly. Sorry for this, Emma. Just let me jump in here. Let me follow up quickly because you were in the General Assembly. You have a sense of how the hot dogs are made, so to speak. What are the conversations, at least that you can admit to? I don't mean it that way, Mr. Secretary, but what are some of the conversations that you might have or want to have, or what advice would you give some of your former colleagues that are now making the budget? Republican-controlled, certainly, first time in 100 years. But what would you like to see done differently?
Well, you know, I think the challenge when it comes to health care overall is I think everybody agrees that we've got to find a way to better manage the system. But we tend to do it in jumps and starts and quick changes, and it's hard for a system to adapt to quick changes in business or anything else. And I'm a CPA, I know, you know, that process. So if you got hospitals that's been built and they've made investments and they've done things around the way the system currently is, be it certificate of need, be it the way they're funded through Medicaid, be it whatever, and then all of a sudden you want to make a quick change to try to adapt to a budget change or whatever, it's very difficult to do that. What we really have to do is have a strategy, a 5 to 10 year strategy of how we take this healthcare system from where it is to where it needs to be. And I think everybody wants to do that. It's just when you mix all the politics into it, it's very difficult to start making those difficult decisions of where we're going to go. But sooner or later, we're going to have a really tough time sustaining our healthcare system, sustaining these programs in North Carolina, unless we find ways to be more efficient and effective in what we do.
How will all this affect relocation? Job growth is what we need to spur our housing and other economic initiatives. So how does it affect us from a relocation? How does the business community look at where we are from?
Well, you know, I think we have a strong healthcare system. We've got major academic training centers, and those are going to be there. We've got major healthcare systems. I think we're going to see a lot of the smaller hospitals continue to be managed by the larger systems where there's more continuity. I think we're going to find in some of the more rural areas, the smaller hospitals are going to have to ultimately cease doing some of the things that really could be done better or more efficiently in a larger medical center and be there. You know, there's a lot of concern, and the governor, one of the reasons in her budget she tried to avoid major cuts in Medicaid, because we all realize that whether or not we intended it to be, Medicaid is an economic driver in the state. Go to the website for the Department of Agriculture, and they generate $9.4 billion a year in receipts in North Carolina. You go to Medicaid, and you're going to see that we're a $12 billion operation. So Medicaid is a larger economic driver in the state than agriculture is. Agriculture is extremely important to the state, but when you compare the two, you also see the impact that has. And that's a concern. And one of the reasons we've tried to minimize what kind of reductions there may be in Medicaid. But I don't see us having a weaker healthcare system, but we've got to have a smarter healthcare system.
In about the last minute, it's not fair because it's a major piece, but mental health, mental illness, some of the mental illness facilities around the state that just don't have the champions out there. Why is that? Well,
you know, it's when I went to the legislature, I'd never had experienced anyone in my family with mental illness. And the National Alliance of Mental Illness, Association of Mental Illness asked me to come to a chapter meeting. I went and I heard some of the stories and it got me interested, and so I've had some interest in it. But it's one of those things that unless you've been impacted by it personally, it's something that's just kind of out there. And I think right now, while there's a lot of folks in the legislature, I know the governor is, I am, are very interested in trying to find ways to improve that system. We don't have that personal connection, and I tell the advocates for mental health all the time, build the personal connection.
That's a good way to end it. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good to have you on the program.
Great to be here. Yeah. Thank you.
Emma, nice to see you. Thanks for being here. Jay, welcome back.
Thank you.
Happy summer to you all. Thanks for watching. Until next week, I'm Chris William. We hope your business is good. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. And by Novant Health, a not-for-profit group of hospitals and physician clinics, ranked as one of our nation's 10 best healthcare systems, caring for patients and communities in North and South Carolina. Major funding also by King & Spalding, an international law firm with over 800 lawyers in 13 offices worldwide, providing legal services to clients in the Carolinas and throughout the world. For more information, visit www.kslaw.com. Additional funding provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. There's a place for those who subscribe to the theory that business doesn't have to be boring. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries, headquartered in Hartsville since 1899. And by viewers like you. Thank you. You may write us at Carolina Business Review, 3242 Commonwealth Avenue, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28205.